My name is Neil Raymond Price, and this is intro or easy intro to GMing. If you're looking for the dice panel, that was yesterday. Sorry, you've missed it. All right. Let's start this off with a quick show of hands. How many folks here have ever GM'd or DM'd or story told or whatever them before? Fair. How many would like to? All right. All right. You're going to want to by the end of this. I guarantee it. All right. So the thing I want to stress at the outset is that role-playing games are a collaborative exercise. It's not about one person telling a story. It's about a group of people coming together to tell a collaborative story. Now, the GM may, in most types of systems, actually be the person who drives a lot of that and drives a lot of the story construction, but it is fundamentally everyone at the table actually playing the game and creating the story. So, just don't think of yourself as a boss. Don't think of yourself as a director. Maybe think of yourself as a director, but just don't think of yourself as a railroad conductor, I should say. So this workshop's not going to be about any particular game system, but I'm going to guess if I ask for a show of hands about who wants to play D&D, it would be most of the room. Actually, yeah, let's see it. Nope. Yeah, I figured. All right. That's okay. This is more about how to look for and learn skills for all kinds of games. Let's take a step back. I talked about the GM being one of the players and part of the collaborators there. The GM often has responsibilities that other players might not. That doesn't mean they need to be the responsible one. Responsibility is shared at the table. It's the responsibility of everyone at the table to make sure everyone else is having a good time. That includes the GM too. So as a GM, you probably want to be fans of your players. I would assume you would be since you're gaming for them, but you also want to be fans of their characters and kind of root for those characters to succeed. You're playing adversaries, but you, the GM, are not their adversary to start off with. And not all games ask GMs to do the same kinds of things. Like I said, there's that kind of director model before, and there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But most modern games now have settled into sort of the GM is sort of a first among equals, responsible for a number of crafting elements about the game and making sure the game drives forward. But they're not, solely responsible for all of the rules or for completely directing play. That said, you'll find as a GM, you need to make a lot of adjudications. You need to make a lot of kind of adjustments. And it is your responsibility to make sure stuff is kept on track and that the game itself is moving along and people don't get bogged down in minutia. Two things I want to stress on the outset here. Number one is that questions are going to be your best friend. And that's questions of the character and questions of the player. I don't know how many folks were at my how to write an RPG setting yesterday, but it kind of devolved into a GM advice session. And one of the questions about how do I deal with this in character, how do I deal with this player action is, well, have you just asked the player why they're doing that? Have you asked them what they are doing? Questions are a way to help your players and their characters express themselves and contribute to play. Even if it's a question like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, these are the consequences. Or can we try it another way? Those are fair questions to do. And those are questions that you can absolutely ask in your role as kind of guiding and facilitating play. And, facilitating play is exactly what the GM does. We say that they run games, but they really facilitate play, moderate play, keep play moving, and just observe everything as the whole story unfolds. So while everyone's kind of laser focused on their character and making sure it's the GM who has to take the wide-eye view to the situation. So how many folks watch Critical Role, have watched a lot of the online? Okay, fair number of people. So, when you watch folks on Twitch or you watch them on YouTube and you watch these like Brendan Lee Mulligan or Matt Mercer run a game, you know, it looks like they have a natural knack for making magic happen. It looks like they have they're you know, fantastic storytellers and fantastic game masters, and they are. But you also have to remember that they are professional actors. They do that for a living in a lot of cases, and they're playing with other professional actors. Now, while I'm going to extol the virtue of improv and suggest that everyone here go to an improv class, even if you don't ever plan to be a GM, because they're just useful skills to have, you can't really compare yourself to people who are doing this as entertainment professionals. But that said, that doesn't mean that you can't get to be as good as they are. Game masters aren't born. They're not even made. They're practiced. It's a skill. The medium of play, the narrative gaming, all of that takes practice, and it takes practice to really get through and to do. And so you might learn to play like a certain type of game and a certain system. You might learn to play a certain scenario, or you might just learn to play your players. I gamed with the same group for 20 years, and when I tried to go and run a game for another group, it was quite an experience because they were just very, very different. And even though I'd played with other groups before, like I'd always just run for my group, and the in jokes and the ways of controlling conversation that you develop with 20 years with the same people don't always just translate to other folks. But that kind of goes to illustrate that you know, we don't all achieve great play in the same ways. You learn what you enjoy as a GM, and keep playing with that and get good at it as you go. So, being a GM doesn't come with a badge or a license. A lot of us got forced into it because nobody else at the table wanted to do it. But you know, it's fun. It's a great role. It's good to do. And so if you're looking for a badge or you're looking for blanket permission, it doesn't exist, but you have it. You are all GMs now. Congratulations. All right. So we talked a little bit about choosing a style and kind of choosing a voice. Style kind of includes what you put into play and what you leave out. It's what you say, how you ask things, what you encourage and discourage at the table. It's how and why you portray play. And the more you play and the more you GM, the wider variety of games you read and play, the more ways you'll have to to really describe rules, to portray characters, share worlds, help players play. From a practical standpoint of just narrating things, I've never really liked those little sidebars that they sometimes put in adventures that says, read this to the players. I always find it's just stilted because it's not my voice. What I'd recommend you do, though, is besides the improv class route, there's an option on a lot of Netflix shows and a couple other streaming services shows for folks who are visually impaired. And what it is essentially another narrator track, an audio track over that narrates exactly what's going on between dialogue. It's kind of interesting. It was premiered with Daredevil a couple years ago, back when that was on Netflix. But now that it's on Disney Plus, that track is still on there. And I turned it on as a lark, but I found it really, really useful as a game master and a game designer, because they're very good at just describing what exactly is going on in a very breathy clip and then not losing the cadence of dialogue going on. But that's how I do it. How you do it is going to be something that you're going to have to find your voice as you're going through your style and as you're actually running games. It's good to start with an adventure that someone else has made, but even from the start there, don't feel that you need to do it verboten, and don't feel that it needs to be exactly the way it's laid out in there. You should be able to adapt, and you should be able to make it in your own style and your own voice. Okay. So, we went over a couple of we talked about the GM responsibilities a little bit earlier, but we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the other responsibilities that they have. It can be gamey, it can be social, it can be narrative. And by that, I mean, the GM could be the most savvy, knowledgeable person about the rules at the table. They can be in charge of kind of building the story, or they could just be in charge of just kind of making sure the players are marshaled and corralled, because some players are a lot more driven than others. That aforementioned group that I gamed 20 years with, I have one player who really loves pathos. He really loves big scenes, big drama. And the other one is just a very goal oriented guy. And so are all of his characters. And so they're like, are we doing the thing for the person? No, well, let's go do it. um, so, the game master and in RPGs, we're both the performer and the writer of these things, but we're also the audience for it. Because remember, the GM is another player at the table. Okay. So, one of the most important responsibilities for a GM is to create an atmosphere at the table. And that's an atmosphere of it being positive, productive, and creative. And safe as well. I'll add on to that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't play a horror game. And this often gets conflated a lot online. In the last 5 to 10 years, the RPG industry has developed a lot of safety tools. I'm sure, have folks here gamed with safety tools? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. A lot of RPGs have developed very robust safety tools. There's also a lot of stuff available online. We're going to talk about one of my favorite methods in just a moment. But the atmosphere should be collaborative. You're building a game with everyone else. It needs to be creative, and it needs to be positive. It needs to be a good experience for the players. Like I said with safety tools, a lot of people are like, well, if I'm playing a horror game like Vampire the Masquerade, or we're playing Curse of Strahd or something, well, it shouldn't be safe for people, and it shouldn't be, upsetting. It should be upsetting to them. And it's like, well, yes, but like watching a horror movie, that's only something that you buy into if you actually like consent to buying into it. No, I will say this, no amount of fun that you'll have at the role playing table is actually worth making someone in the real world very upset. Like someone at your table who's probably a friend of yours, or even just a stranger at a convention if you're running a one shot. Whatever's going on in the game is not worth making that person upset or unhappy. So one of my favorite safety tools and one of my favorite kind of level setting things is what's called Session Zero. Are people here familiar with it? I see you nodding. See others? Yeah. Okay. I did see some shaking heads. So Session Zero is the first time you meet the game. You don't actually game. You might run a little bit of a prologue. You might run a little bit of that. But it's there primarily for you to make characters together, to talk about the system, to talk about little eccentricities, share the book if you need to. But more importantly, as a GM, your goal during the Session Zero should be to set the tone of the game. You say, this is a romantic style game. There's going to be this and that. There's going to be these kinds of things. This is a swashbuckling adventure, so you need to buckle your swashes. And having the players make characters together both avoids them from accidentally stepping on each other's toes in terms of niche, but also it really helps them to create links between their backstories. It helps you to help them ground them a little bit more into the world, because the player might be, well, I had this idea about this slavery ring that enslaved my character, and then he escaped. And it's like, well, most of the slave owning countries are fairly far off, but maybe you could do blah 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 instead. Those sorts of things. But it's also a place to actually talk about thresholds and talk about safety tools. There's a number of very very good. Resources online. Monty Cook's stoplight chart and Monty Cook's safety worksheet are very very useful, because it's as simple as just like talking about certain topics that are inevitable to arise in the game and asking players like how they want to deal with them, how they want to come up in the game. A very good friend of mine wrote a book for Call of Cthulhu called Harlem Unbound that takes place in 1930s Harlem, and it takes place, back then Harlem was a predominantly black town, and racism is a major part of the game. And like, how do your players want to deal with that? How do you actually deal with these issues in game? And there's other games where, body horror might come up and players just don't want to deal with that. For someone to play a game like Vampire the Masquerade and say, I don't really want to deal with blood in the game, well, that's not, maybe this is not the game for you. But when I was running Vampire the Masquerade, I ran through the worksheet with folks, and everyone kind of passed it. They talked about things that they never wanted to see in the game. Violence against children, for example, violence against small, like, animals and that sort of thing. And then stuff that kind of could be hinted at, but not really, they didn't want to see on camera. Things like human trafficking, which they're vampires. They human traffic a whole bunch. Enslavement of people, which again, vampires do, but the players didn't want to see it on camera. But it could be hinted at. And then everything else was pretty much fair game for them to see and to kind of engage with. That said, as we got further into the session, and we got further into the game, at one point, a character used a power to injure someone's face. And I described the damage that power did to that NPC's eyes. And one of my players freaked out a little bit. He has an eye thing, and he didn't even think to mention it. And that was okay, because we had fostered a very positive and productive tone at the table. And he felt comfortable enough to be like, I'm really not happy right now. This is freaking me out. And so we stopped play, and we took 10 minutes. We talked it out. We rewound the scene, and then we kind of went forward. It's totally fair game for you to be explicit about tone in session 0. Never be afraid to just look your players in the eye and ask them what their expectations are. Ask them what they're doing or what they're trying to do. Remember that, there's a divide between the players and the characters at the table. Sometimes it can get a little muddy, but you need to be able to take a step back and kind of address them on both levels. It's a totally fair game to say something like, let's keep this game rated PG-13. You're allowed one fuck. Or I need us to dial down a little bit on the gore, descriptions of gore. It's totally fine to say those sorts of things. So if nothing else, I encourage that you read up on session 0 before this. I encourage that you read up on safety tools. There's a large number of them online, and they're very useful no matter what game you're playing. And just to understand what your players want to play as well. So, there's kind of a straw man of preparedness with GMing, and that says, well, no decision or detail or character is fair game unless you prepare it 90 minutes before play. And I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely not true. But there's a corollary straw man of improvisation that says nothing a game master wants to see in play before the moment of the game session matters at all. And that's also not true. There is a sweet spot in preparation that you need to actually have in play. But you also want to explore different degrees of preparation and improvisation as you go through the games itself. A lot of people have come to me and like, for example, at the panel yesterday, someone was saying, well, my players are playing in this game and none of their characters want to do any of the things that we kind of agreed on to start with. And I was like, well, did you start a session 0? And he was like, well, no, not really. But that's the sort of thing that can be addressed by those issues. And that's one of the things that GM should be comfortable just asking their players about. If you're dropping lots of hints about how the bad guys are living on the moon, and you're like, there's a rocket here that'll take you to the moon, and they're like, nah, I'm not going to get on it. It's perfectly fine for you to say out of character to them, Why don't you want to do it? Why doesn't your character want to do it? Remember, questions are the best tool in your toolbox. I don't know how many folks here have seen Ted Lasso, but there's a quote that gets bandied about, and that's be curious, not judgmental. Never just be afraid to ask, why are you doing that? What's your goal here? What are you trying to do? And remember, because you should be rooting for the players and for their characters as well, even though you're playing adversaries, helping them actually be able to succeed in their goals makes everyone at the table happy. Okay, we're going to do a quick little exercise because this is technically a workshop. Let me see a quick show of hands if someone wants to volunteer. All right, Jester. So Jester, we're in a room here. I'd like you to tell me what you hear, what you see, what you smell.
Smell, not really anything. I'm wearing a mask. See, room full of people, lots of different colored shirts, mostly colorless walls, bland, interesting ceiling, very colorful floor. Here, a lot of breathing.
Okay, all those are great, and what we did there is we described a room, and it's enough that most of you, I think, could visualize it. You did a good job. You could probably get a little more flowery or purple with your prose if that's the sort of voice that you have, if that's the kind of style that you have. The shadows in the room descended towards the back, something like that. But whenever you GM and whenever you set the scene and whenever you actually deal with prep, it just helps to think about the scenes that you're going into and write down 3 different senses that are involved in that scene. Sight is probably going to be one of the major ones you do, so it's sound as well. But smell is especially potent, and it's something that really kind of goes through. Even if it is, you can't smell anything because you're wearing a mask. The players are constantly reminded that their characters have a mask on. Or you could say the smell is so bad that it gets past your mask and makes you gag a little bit. Or taste or feel. Any of those really helps to root folks in a scene. So actual play involves some amount of improvisation, making decisions in the moment that you really didn't foresee. It means portraying people and places you might have imagined before play, and then adapting what's going on to the actions of the player characters. So let's talk a little bit about involvement and description. So involvement means asking questions. It means involving the answers to those questions in play. Because role-playing is a collaborative experience, you should feel okay to ask your players and their characters things about it and then kind of craft what's going on from there. So you ask the characters things by asking the players. Try not to make a fool of the character and definitely don't make a fool of the player because that just, you're there to have fun, not to mock folks. But there's 3 steps to involvement that you need to learn. Number 1 is asking the question. Number 2 is listening to the answer. And number 3 is adapting the answer into the game world as you're going, or asking more questions so that you get a more compatible answer. So you can involve other players as much as you want without stressing the players or their characters. Consider just asking these things to keep people involved in the game. Let's say one of your player characters does something. They're climbing the edge of the bar or something like that. You can feel free to ask another player, what does your character think about that? Or what reaction does this provoke from other people? Or what happens to you when you hear the commotion from the other room? How does your character react? Questions again are your best way of getting information about the game world and getting information about what the players intend and what the characters are actually doing. For example, you can say to them, and you can use other questions to draw out some more specificity of what they want in there. For example, if you say to a player, hey, when you refused the Baron's request, were you polite or were you really dismissive? The player isn't obligated to be either, But if you ask a player, what do you want to do? What are you doing? Describe what you're up to. Describe this or that. A lot of players, especially new ones, are going to freeze. It's something called decision paralysis. You have too many options to choose from. So don't give them those options, but give them paths. Give them areas to go. The player's not obligated to be polite or dismissive in the refusal of the Baron's request, but you've given them a place to start and start thinking about it. And they're like, no, I don't want to be dismissive. I would insult him to his face. And it's like, okay, well, that's a little more aggressive, but we got that out of you now. And so this is important because it's part of involving the players in shared fiction, and descriptions will accrue as you do it. And the characters experience them, but just not all at once. Again, whenever you're describing a scene or you're describing everything, try to involve at least 3 senses in the part of it. Characters live the worlds in which we play, and they might remember past experiences, like the sound of goblin drums or a searing burn that suggests a knife has a kind of poison on it. It's good to let characters know things, and it's good to keep a list of those running details that they create and that you accumulate in order to pepper them through later scenes. Okay. Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit to a Q&A part because that's going to kind of break up a little bit of the monotony in here. And won't be just me talking for 2 hours. So of the folks who haven't GM'd before, what makes you want to GM now? Does anyone want to volunteer the things? Yes.
I've always loved storytelling, and I will not exactly my favorite thing in the world, but I will gladly help use this to help kind of determine what happens in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. It is important to remember that this is a role-playing game. Telling a story is wonderful. Telling a collaborative story is a slightly different skill set, but it's one that really good GMs will excel at. And it is important to know the rules of the game, just because that teaches you what the core gameplay loop is. It teaches you what games should be kind of doing. I'm sure folks here have heard my rant about D&D before, about how the core gameplay loop of D&D is kicking down doors and getting loot and then repeating. I know other folks are like, well, I want to run a romance game, or I want to run court intrigue, and it's like, well, it'll do that. It's just not very good at it, but that's fine. Who else has a GM before? Yes.
So I want to do just break out of my comfort zone. And I think it's a good learning experience.
Okay, I definitely applaud that. Who here started GMing because nobody else at the table wanted to do it? Yeah. Welcome to the club. You are part of a very, very large brotherhood. Okay. So your way to being a GM is not the one true way. A big one true way doesn't exist. Again, it's about finding your voice and everything. So I'm going to take some tools out of my own toolbox and just keep asking you some questions about what y'all want out of this and what you want to do. This is again a Q&A section. What's a major issue you run into in terms of running a game? What's your biggest structural hurdle to doing that?
Players getting bored during combat. Other players take long turns.
Aha. Yeah. So pacing, like I said, pacing and making sure that things keep flowing and that everyone's invested in the game is a really vital part of that. And it's probably the most important job that a GM has. But unfortunately, especially in games that really prioritize combat, like D&D, like, to be honest, 80% of role-playing games look regular. It can be an issue if you're not involved in combat, if you have a primarily non-combatant character, or if you just have a social character or something like that, or if someone goes all in on the really tactical play. It can be difficult to balance that. One thing to do is to talk about it, like I said, at the start of session 0, or even midway through the campaign. Be like, guys, I didn't, well, I shouldn't say guys, folks at the table, I didn't realize there was going to be so much combat going on here. You know, how do you feel about that? Well, would you want us to keep going on this? Is that something we're slowing down or not? Never be afraid to just directly ask the players what you want out of them and what they want out of you. Because that direct communication is one of the best ways to handle that. To keep them engaged, what I would recommend you do is look at the player character sheets and look at the folks who aren't in combat, aren't doing this thing, and find alternate things for them to do. If one of the characters can, I don't know, is a druid who used to create water or something, maybe there's a dozen little small fires around it, like running around and lighting trees and stuff on fire. It's like, oh no, trees on fire. Things like that. One of the games I helped build is called Exalted, and there's a kind of alternate subsystem where you can do out of combat actions to help the party in combat to generate sort of a meta resource for it. And it's easy when the game actually makes it easy for you, when the mechanics drive a lot of the that's another reason why it's very important to know the mechanics and know exactly what experiences you help drive with them and what you're trying to need spike at the front. I realize that boils down to find stuff that you do, which is not all that satisfying. But it is important. Like I said, asking those questions about how are the characters reacting, what are the characters planning to do, how do you feel about this huge combat action that they did, what does your character say to that? That sort of thing, just like keep poking them, keep getting them to contribute to the scene. And I think just by involving them, even in discussion of it, it'll help keep the players really focused on it. All right, that's one structural program. What's another? Yes.
Are you hard time building a balanced encounter or kind of what?
Okay. Yeah, puzzles are a difficult thing, mostly because you look up puzzles online and they are either literal children's puzzles, like oh, it's a bit of or they are these incredibly complex cryptographic codes that you can spend 2 weeks out of character trying to break. It's like cool. Typically, what I like to do in terms of puzzles, I don't like to reduce it quite to a die roll, but I like to try to relate it to the character's ancestry or the character's culture, a reason why they would actually solve it. A game called, or a game system called Gumshoe is built around investigating encounters. And the core gameplay loop is you investigate certain scenes and you accrue enough clues at the end of each scene so that when you eventually do fight the big bad guy, you have all these bonuses from these little clues you picked up along the way to help make the fight a lot easier. But they have a concept of Gumshoe called the core clue. And the core clue is the thing that you cannot fail to pick up, no matter how badly your players roll, no matter how badly it is. They always pick up the core clue and they move on. But how they pick it up can definitely be influenced by the die rolls. It can be definitely influenced by a whole lot of the things that you have kind of going on in and out. So I would treat puzzles not as an out-of-character thing for the players. It's there for the character, but that also frees you. Because you don't need to design the intricate puzzle, you don't need to put it all in there. You just need to talk about like a kind of cultural puzzle. You can just make it up. It's a Kavarian triangle game puzzle. I don't know what that is, but the character does. And you can even draw the player to describing a little bit, again, describing a little bit like why they'd be able to solve it and why they do that. So again, I realize that the advice of Mouthfuls to puzzles don't do them. But instead, talk about the puzzle as an in-game thing and relate to why one character can solve it. This also brings us back to a much larger point about what I call failing forward. So there's a lot of games that have it, and there's a lot of games that never used to do it. But by and large, a lot of games have a binary success tree. Like you roll to pick a rock, On failure, you don't pick the lock. On success, you do pick the lock. Okay, cool. But I mean, I'm sure folks have, someone here has had someone in their group try to pick a lock, fail, and they go, well, can I do it again? And it's like, that's not fun, that's not dramatic. Whenever you make a player roll, only roll when failure is interesting. If there's a binary mechanic to it. And only roll if failure on the action would create some sort of longer thing for the characters to overcome later in the story. Here's an example of this. This was probably the best example I had of failing forward. It goes back to that lock picking thing. The person described it to me talking about the binary success failure thing. And they're like, wouldn't it be more interesting if you know, you pick the lock and you successfully got it open, but you triggered the silent alarm so that the police are arriving in 10 minutes. You still get the documents to the safe. That's the core food you need to move the story forward. But now you create a greater complication and your players need to fight their way out. That's cool. That drives things forward, even though they screwed up on the roll. It's going to be weird the first time your players fail a roll, and you're like, great, the thing pops off, you know, and the safe opens up, and they're like, but I failed the roll. And then, you know, when the guards swarm the place, they're like, oh, that's what happened. But, you know, don't eat puzzles and don't eat encounters or don't eat information or don't eat things behind a single binary success or failure. Only roll when it's going to be interesting. The other part you asked about was building balanced encounters. And that's a little bit harder because it really does depend on the actual capabilities of your players and the capabilities of your player characters. And those are two different things because some folks do not have a good grasp of system mastery. That's okay. Part of what you can do as a GM is to kind of give them a number of options to kind of go through and to do that. I wish I had a better answer for you other than balance is a net. Puzzles don't matter and balance is a net. Question answer. But it is, though. A lot of times we think of combat as a white room of number versus number. And it never plays out like that at the table. It never plays out like that with the die roll. And it can be very, very difficult to make sure that everyone kind of comes through the game triumphant or bloody, but unbroken, that sort of thing. If the game allows for it, and D&D doesn't have this as part of the core rules, so this would be just sort of a pack to players. You can go into it and say death isn't on the line in this. This is not a fight that will result in your characters dying. You fail to do death saves. The 3 death saves are in there because it makes it a lot harder to kill a D&D character. I don't know if anyone here played 3rd edition back in the day, but like a starting wizard at 4 HP. Yeah. If they got sneezed on, they died. Yeah, it was pretty brutal. But you know, 3 death saves are a luxury now. But you can say stuff to them like, hey, that's not on the table. Just be creative. You know, you don't need to worry too much about it. There'll be narrative consequences to losing it, but the characters won't die. They just wake up, they got their stuff, that sort of thing. And then if they choose to put death on the table, you can be like, okay, and maybe give them a little bonus for it, give them a second win, or give them inspiration or something like that. Just because they accepted the death is on the table and now they're going to really give it their all. That said, if they do that and then die, you pretty much have to be like, you said that was on the table. But in terms of balancing encounters, all I can really say is look at the capabilities of your characters and see what will challenge them. Make sure it's not a challenge that's impossible for them to actually defeat. Or if it is a challenge that's impossible for them to defeat, you need to make that clear to the players, not out of game after a couple of rounds. For example, if none of your characters have magical weapons or things that are capable of striking incorporeal creatures, right? A bunch of ghosts are gonna really fuck these characters up. Oh, there's my one flop. Those characters get really messed up by most ghosts, and that'll be fun for maybe 2 rounds. And then the players may get frustrated, the characters may get frustrated. So you as a GM need to be able to say to the players, you're not actually capable of hurting these creatures, and your characters realize that. So at that point, a tactical withdrawal is probably the best option. And if you state it like that, and you say your character realizes this, you know, people will be less inclined to be in a feudal battle to the death. Just keep going against it. They'll run. They'll regroup. They'll come back with magic weapons or things that, or oils or whatever it is. They'll think about it. They'll strategize, and the encounter will be a lot easier. And here's a secret: you can adjust the encounter up and down as you're going through there. Don't tell the players the hit point total of the dragon. Don't tell them like all of the capabilities of the encounter. You can show it to them after the encounter's over, but don't go fully in on what you design. And don't show it to them right off. And they say, well, how damaged is it? How much? You know, how bad did I hit them? You can be like, well, they look really bloody, or you know, oh, they're on their last legs. Narratively describe it. That gives you a bit of freedom, both to adjust an encounter in a way that doesn't necessarily comport with player expectations, because a lot of your players have probably read the same book and they know what to expect out of a certain type of creature. And then if you change that creature, you're like, oh no, I've never seen that before. And it'll throw off their game. That's good. You should do that with the characters as well. But it also allows you to adjust the encounter up and down, depending on how well the player is doing in your creature may not use one of the actions available to it, just to make things a little bit easier. Never be afraid to improvise, never be afraid to adjust and fly. And yeah, that was a very long-winded answer to your question. So, all right, we just covered infrastructural changes. What are some big social problems that people have on the table?
Imposter syndrome, like being worried, oh, I'm not as funny or creative as somebody else. Like, I'm gonna let them down. I'm gonna let the story down. Try to DM.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is something that everyone struggles with. Literally everyone. Yeah, there's an author, Neil Gaiman. I'm sure a lot of you folks have probably heard of him. He tells a story about imposter syndrome, about how he went to a party and he met another person named Neil there and started a conversation. And that Neil was suffering from imposter syndrome and was like, well, you know, I'm just a guy who did what they told me to do. I don't know why I'm here at this party with all these creators and leaders and thinkers and all that. And Neil Gaiman was like, but you're Neil Armstrong. You went to the moon. You're the first man to get to the moon. He's like, yeah, blah, blah. And, you know, if the first man on the moon had imposter syndrome, anybody can have it. But that also means that nobody knows what they're doing, and everyone's a fraud, including your players. And so, it's fine. The only way to overcome it is to practice. It's just by going ahead, you know, damn the torpedoes, and just kind of running right into it. It'll be something you have to grapple with. But the way to make yourself feel a little bit better about it is questions. Like I said, questions are the best tool in your toolkit. After the session is over, block out 10 to 15 minutes of time on Discord or whatever, drop out a character, decompress a little bit. Ask the players what they thought of how the game is going. Ask the players where they think the game is going, where they want their characters to kind of grow. Ask them, you know, hey, I was trying to do this and this in this scene. Did that land for all of you? Did all of you get that? How did you feel when we were in the scene? And just listen to their feedback, because that's what you're doing. You're listening to feedback. That way you'll know if you're doing a good job or not, or you're making them feel what they want to feel, or what you're trying to make them feel. And if they GM before, maybe they'll have a tip for you, or maybe they will have like a different way. Like, oh, if you really want to scare me, blah blah blah. That's like, okay, duly noted. I will really scare you in the future. Questions? Just talk to them, and you will feel a lot better about yourself. All right, someone else give me another social problem. Yes.
I mean, one of the players at your table wants to play the campaign more silly than the other players and wants to play it more seriously.
Okay, who here has seen the little one-page comic about Slappy the Furball Barbarian? Yes, you've still seen it. Okay, just to summarize for it, the first couple of panels are of this Furball Barbarian, like muscular but with like big ears, in clown makeup and holding a pie. And so he's a barbarian who's raised by circus clowns, right? And he's going to pie someone, and the DM is like, how many pies do you have? And he's like, 12, they're on my character sheet. You're gonna get a tonal mismatch sometime, just by nature of the players that you have. But that should be something we discuss in session 0. So if someone goes off script a little bit, you can say to them directly, hey, we agreed at the start that the tone would be this. You're not really going through that. What's the deal? And again, be curious, not judgmental. Don't say, you're a dick, we're ruining the tone. Be like, we agreed this was going to be the way to go. Why are you acting like this? And a lot of times people will just kind of correct their behavior, kind of don't do that. It's confrontational without being super confrontational. That said, I have the end of the Slappy comic, says 40 sessions later, and Slappy's missing an eye, and he's like holding up this temple was collapsing, and everyone else is like, Slappy, you're gonna die. And he's like, you need to get the phylactery out of here now. Just run. And other characters like, Slappy, he's like, I know, I've always known. So that's the way a lot of those games have gone for me. Characters will start with a stupid slapstick character, and you take them seriously. Like, be like, oh, is that what your character's doing? That's why they want to do that. That's what they're doing. That's what the consequences are. You take it seriously, and you address them seriously, and you keep the tone of the game. You keep it straight and just don't deviate from it. And they'll come around, and a lot of times they'll become really ridiculous.
I think that's in my experience, that's absolutely true. And I would also say, when you have players like that, a lot of times it's just people who like to make jokes, and once they get out of their system, it's like, well, what do you really do? I mean, like, oh no, he's something else.
Yeah.
A lot of times they just want to say the joke, and then they're done. And then you can continue. And you don't have to be judgmental about it. You can be like, oh, are we really, is that the route you're going down? I'm like, no, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah, exactly. You're the GM. You're responsible for setting the tone, keeping the tone. And as long as you're not deviating and cracking a bunch of jokes, eventually they'll get on the same page. And if they don't, ask them why they're not. Yes?
So I only GM once. It's being fine that I can GM again. But one of the things that I received as feedback was that I was very simplistic in my session. I didn't know how to take that as a good thing or a bad thing.
You were very, what did you say?
Sadistic.
Oh, sadistic.
Yeah. I had no idea how to react to that. So should I just send them a message, be like, okay, is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Is that,
Yeah, I mean, first off, if you're wondering what someone's thinking, ask them.
okay.
That's the first and best thing you can do. Maybe they lie to you, maybe they're not telling you the truth, but you can't control that. You can't control whether or not you ask in the first place. You're gonna miss 100% of the shots you're gonna take. But being sadistic, I talked a little bit earlier about the adversarial relationship with GMing, and it's kind of important to understand a little bit from history where that comes from. D&D, and by extension a lot of modern role-playing, comes from wargaming groups, where you have two opposing forces kind of fighting one another. And originally the DM was supposed to be a character more in charge of refereeing and adjudicating a lot of those things. But over time in early D&D, the method, especially as it revolved around tournament play, which you only got the one session in there, a lot of GM advice got built around you need to punish the characters as much as you can. And kind of by extension, punish the players a little bit too. There's a very famous GM book called Play Dirty by John Wick that I don't recommend for exactly that reason, because he recommends how to create an adversarial relationship with players. And I'm like, I don't want to piss off my players and my friends. I don't want to do that. You want to have everyone on the same team. You want to be rooting for the players and the characters as the team. Even as you're putting adversity in front of them, you still want to see them triumph, and you should feel the joy when they triumph. As should the players as well. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Helping a new player who isn't, they don't feel like they can role play, they're not good at it, they don't know what to say, they struggle with role play.
Well, first off, you, like I said before about maintaining the tone, you're also responsible for kind of keeping the positive atmosphere at the table there. And that means no negative self-thoughts either. If someone's like, oh, I suck at role playing, be like, no, you don't. It's, you know, to a degree, we kind of tell ourselves stories about ourselves, and that becomes baked in our personality. I'm really bad at math. Oh, I can't cook. And eventually it comes to a point of, can you really not cook, or will you just not learn how to cook? And there's some people who can't, but I think that most people don't want to learn how to cook, and that's why they can't do it. So positive thinking. When they're like, oh, I suck at role playing, be like, hey, no, you're great. You're fine. Find some positive thing to actually compliment them on that they or their characters did. And if they haven't done anything, which they might actually suck at role playing, especially if they're doing much fun. Just try to put a lot of pressure on them, but do what I said earlier about giving them options how to feel character. Is your character angry about this? You know, you're a traditionalist dwarf and they shave your beard. How do you feel about that? Giving them options and methods to respond helps them really develop those sorts of things in character. And eventually they're going to step beyond it. They're going to actually start doing that on their own and actually start using it on their own. It's a bit more critical thinking on your part, but you have to set things up so they can pick out a number of options of what their characters do. That definitely gets them more involved in the game. Especially when it's prompting in response to another character's action. That makes the two of them effective. Okay. Any questions other than how do I get everyone to show up on time? No one will answer that. Yes.
Earlier you were talking about not giving your players decision paralysis. How do you deal with like the opposite situation here? Do you have to come up with the effects of the things that characters do?
So, I talked before about separating the players and the characters a little bit, but that also applies to you, because you are another player at the table. It is perfectly okay to say, so the evil undead lich that's been a 1,000-year-old genius, he would have a quick response to this. I do not. Let's take a 10-minute break so I can figure this out. They know, like your players know what's up. You don't need to lie to them. You can just be like, yeah, I need 10 minutes to figure out what the super genius is actually going to do. Because I am not myself a super genius. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay to do. And it's okay to kind of like take a quick step back and do that. What I said before about the preparation versus improvisation and how it's bad to rely on one or the other, what you should do, the best way to prep for something is to have a complete idea of what the entire situation is around it. That doesn't mean you need to stat up every guard. That doesn't mean you need to give every merchant a backstory with 3 children and a dog with 3 legs. You don't need to do that, but you need to have an idea of what's going on and who are the major players and why are they doing what they're doing and what are these monsters here and what are their stats and that sort of thing. So that when your players generally do go off script a little bit, you have something else you can slot in there and you have something else you can evolve from.
to go in there. That's the preparation part. The improvisation is when they actually get in there and they start doing that. It's how you move the pieces around that you've already put on the board. And honestly, if your players do something incredibly unexpected or good, like, don't fight it. There have been plenty of times in 25 years, like I said, of role-playing, where my players have gone into a huge battle with the big end guy and walked out of there with everyone smiling and holding hands. And I'm like, I don't know how that happened. And, but it's fine. I'm like, all right, early session. We, everyone gets 3 hours of their life back. That's fine. That's okay. What's important is the players felt like they had a good time, and that you felt like you had a good time. Even if you had a whole tactical session plotted up for this big end. So I ran the Pathfinder Adventure Path Kingmaker back when it first came out. And it's 5 modules and then a 6th module that for some reason has nothing to do with the previous 5. I don't know why that's wrong that way. But, so I actually designed my own 6th module. I designed my whole ending to it. Because by the time we got through the first 5, the players and the characters were at a place that was completely inappropriate for the 6th one to kind of go through. Because it didn't have anything to do with the rest of them. So I made up this whole plot, and they were all level 19, and this is a 3.5 essentially. And so they're super powerful. And I'm like, all right, you're gonna fight an honest to goodness dragon. Just like a big old dragon. And I forget what they used, but they used something to disable the player, the dragon feature of being immune to critical hits. And then the one guy with the Vorpal Sword just kept hacking at him until he got a 20 and then confirmed the crit. And the dragon was barely injured when he did that. But the players went in knowing they were not going to last more than a couple rounds against this thing. And they're like, we've got this one trick up our sleeve. And they did it. They confirmed the crit, they had the Vorpal Sword go off, and their weird trick worked. I did not expect it to. But I felt cheap denying it to them. Like, yeah, we've been playing this game for 18 months. It's been this careful thing. But they're like, we can't win against this thing, so let's go in and do our ace in the hole. Their ace in the hole actually worked, and I was like, I would feel shitty not doing it. So I did. And they sneaker snacked the dragon. And that was that. And they were like, I can't believe that worked, that was awesome. They still talk about it to this day. Even a decade ago. So, must have done something right. You're a player at the table too. What matters is you have fun, and it matters that everyone else has fun as well. And that means not being afraid to murder your darlings, and not being too precious about all the prep work that you did. The worst sin to be as a GM is to railroad the players, to make sure they're going along with your plot, your story, doing exactly what you want. I mean, you're not puppets. It's a collaborative exercise. And sometimes that means they go wildly off script. But also, don't be afraid of them to say you're going off script. I can't tell you how many GM conversations and how many player conversations about how are we going to get to such and such island nation. Oh, we can take a plane, we can take a boat, we can do this, we can do that. And the players argue for like 20 minutes about how they're going to get to the place. And again, that's decision paralysis kind of taking hold. As a GM, you need to keep things moving along. It's like, boom, you're on a boat. You decide that. You're right at the island. So keep that in mind as well. Other questions? Yes.
So it kind of goes back to what I was asking the last question. So you need to give your peers freedom to explore, and you have to have them as a GM. But at what point do you kind of have to force your character? So going back to your rocket ship example, about the rockets was on the moon and they were just on the rocket. Is there a certain point that you as a narrator say you're getting on the rocket?
So this comes back to the session 0 discussion. Once you've set up boundaries, A boundary isn't something that you're telling someone else to do. A boundary, and this applies to any kind of relationship, a good boundary is saying, if you do this, I will do this. If you yell at me, I will stop talking to you. So then when they yell at you and you stop talking to them, they can't pretend to be surprised. They probably can, but they have no right to. Similarly, session 0 is about setting boundaries for yourself, for the game, for other players as well. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that any of the players are that cross those lines or not. It's just saying, hey, here's where the lines are. If we cross them, to what degree, this is what the results are going to be. So setting up a tone, like I was saying before, and setting up expectations are those boundary settings. You're creating a sense of what the game is in. And so when the players are outside that, rather than saying you're getting on the damn rocket, I would go back to the question thing. And you can question the player directly, not just the character. Be like, Bob, why are you being so intransigent? It's like, why is your character being so intransigent? Yeah, because the first one's a judgment. You don't want to do that. Be curious about why they're being intransigent. And you can even ask them directly, do you actually understand? I was running a game. I've actually been running a game right now. I've been a little rusty in GM for a little while. I didn't run any games during the pandemic for some reason. I played it a bunch, but I didn't run it. And I was just getting back into it with my long-term group, and one guy in the group just kept complaining about the people in the setting and everything. And agreed, it made me feel like I was doing something wrong like that. And so I eventually just stopped playing. I was like, hey, do you actually want to play this game? Like, do you want to be a part of this? And he's like, oh no, my character's having a great time being bitchy about it along. And I was like, are you sure? Yeah, it's fine. And he's like, okay. But it was a quick conversation. We had that directly. So, in order, ask why the character is doing it. Ask the player why they don't want to do the thing. And if they don't have a good answer to that, just be like, do you actually want to play it all? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's not actually, I'm not on any of it. I've been in games where someone has asked me that question. I've been like, honestly, I feel too tired, or I'm just really not into it tonight, and that sort of thing. It's a collaborative exercise for everyone, but it's the responsibility of everyone to have fun at the table. And as a GM, there's nothing worse than trying to GM a bunch of folks who do it. Why are you all wasting each other's time? Yes.
Real quick, to that point, that people want to be there. I think you said it's important. A lot of times there's no hostility or anger. This has come up for me recently with a bunch of friends who have kids recently. Mm-hmm. And before they have kids, they're like, hell yeah, man, let's keep playing. Once they have kids, they're no longer allowed to play, right? Yeah. And it's not anybody, it's just they overestimated their time available, right? And you just, and they want to, they love hanging out, but you just ask them, and there's no hard feelings. And you can give them that out and be like, if this is difficult for you, you don't have to apologize.
Yeah, whereas if you try to kind of force them to play and try to do that, they may have some hard feelings about it. And they've all been avoided. It's a simple conversation. Like, 90% of what movie plots. All right, we still got half an hour to go. So, other questions? Yes.
Yeah. So, within the context of this question, be answered, I guess, a little bit more clearly. I will be gaming for the first time ever. But there's obviously a lot of information that needs to be taken. Like, it feels like gaming for D&D just has a lot of content that is available to me, and I want to make sure that I stay organized. And I'm good with being flexible. I think during the session I'll be fine, but I want to know if there's some really good tips to just stay on top of all the plot I need to look at, information I need to read about whatever there is, enemies, stuff like that. And basically just how to stay organized as a DM is the main question.
Okay, so a really good way to keep yourself organized is if you're going through a standard adventure, are you running a module or are you creating your own thing?
It's basically
Right.
my own story, but
There's way. So what I would do is I would write out what the next, like what I would write out how the story would go if the PCs weren't there. If the player characters weren't there, what would everyone do and what would happen? And on what time scale would it happen? So in 2 days from now, the young man is banished from the village for necromancy. The next day, he goes to the graveyard. He raises the undead. The day after that, the undead attack the village and kill everyone there. You have those milestones. You have what's going to go on. You have the major actors involved in there, because those are the events that are going to happen in the recording events. Once you've got those in mind, you'll know exactly where the players kind of come in will break things and how they'll sequence will break that part of that. And that's fine. You make a new sequence after that to adapt to. You're not going for total defensible realism. You shouldn't go for perfection. What you should always shoot for is verisimilitude. You should make the game feel as real as possible to the players and as rational as possible. Everyone there's not doing things they're doing things for reasons. They have reasons for doing things that they're doing. Once you have the motivations of the major players, once you have the sequence of events, everything else will kind of fall into play there. In terms of reading a bunch of lore books, in terms of reading a bunch of things, I'll be brutally honest with you about the secrets of role-playing game setting designers. After 20 years of writing role-playing games, I will sometimes go back and I will read writing. I'll be like, that's terrible writing. That makes no goddamn sense whatsoever. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes some writers are better than others. Sometimes stuff I've written has been better than others at certain points in time. And that's okay. Don't be afraid to put your own spin on things. And don't be afraid to think of a rational reason for why something might be the way that it is. I'm struggling to think of a really particularly good example of that right now, but and I don't really want to spend all night bashing bad settings anyway. But really, it's your world, and you need to understand why things are the way they are. And once you know that, then everything falls into place, especially with the players. Go on, man. Yes.
So one thing I heard was German thing. Is it possible to make your own enemies?
Make your own enemies?
Yeah, your custom made enemies for the players to use.
Oh yeah. These are not actual monsters running around. These are just collections of statistics just thrown down there. There's no reason that dragon can't breathe. Well, breathing frost is a bad example because there's lots of breathing frost. But still, there's no reason that dragon can't be breathing negative energy or something, or rainbows. I don't know. Once you this is a good reason why understanding the rules is important, because once you understand the rules and how the sequence of things works in there, you can take the rules and make something different if you want. You can make whatever you want. It's that's kind of the beauty of a lot of role-playing games, and the beauty of a lot of those designs. Now that said, good GMs make their own monsters. Great GMs steal them and Frankenstein them from other monsters that get a little of this and a little of that. And your players are like, oh my god, this thing is wild. And it's like, yeah, I know. I'm a genius.
Spider stat block, they won't know what they're doing.
Exactly. Mix and match stuff. Make sure it kind of goes together in that. Be prepared to again kind of adjust a little bit if you run into some issues. But don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to make your own mark and make your own monsters and things. Oh, it's on. All right. Other questions? Yes.
What's the the best way to solve character disputes that not only mesh with the characters, but also kind of work within the narrative, but you're still not sure how to kind of solve it, per se?
Solve a character what?
A dispute. Like,
Oh.
character A wants to save the puppy orphanage from burning down. Character B is ambivalent. It makes sense for both characters and it makes sense in the narrative, but you kind of need to figure out what to do in lieu of that.
Okay. You know, I hate to keep coming back to this. Well, the questions are your best tool. Again, they are the best tool that a GM has, just flat out asking them. Saying to your outline the consequences of what the characters are going to do. Hey, if you don't save the puppies from that orphanage, they're going to die. If there's nobody else around. Or if you run in there, you run the possibility of suffering injury, that sort of thing. Laying out the consequences pretty clearly can help resolve a lot of those disputes kind of right off the bat. But if not, the characters don't necessarily need to be on the same page at all. If you're comfortable for a moment kind of taking it out of sequence and kind of addressing one character, putting them in the spotlight to do the thing, that's okay to do. It gets really boring if it happens a lot during, like, say, combat, like we were talking about earlier. Like, you have the one person has the spotlight all the time. That's not great. But if they have it just for a scene or something, that's totally fine. And you can even say, all right, I'm putting the spotlight on this character in the scene. This is like their time to shine, and it's their scene, and that's okay. That's okay. Being open and being communicative to your players is going to be one of the better things that you can do, and it's something you should never be afraid of doing. All right, I know people have more confused. All right.
Actually, something I had developed as my first use of GMing is looking at how to pass the spotlight and try to keep the spotlight moving around to everyone. Even if someone has it for one session, someone else has it for another. I don't want to do it with you.
Okay, it's something that you should say at the outset of the setting. Call it a mini session 0 or something like that. It's tone setting. It's expectation setting. You're creating boundaries. You're saying, obviously everyone's gathered here at the table. This is going to be primarily a session for this player and for their character to do these things. And then they'll have to decide that. And so when you're thinking about the ways to involve other players in the scene, you're asking about the reactions to things. Make sure that the reactions are kind of orbiting around the spotlight character. And that'll work even if you're switching from scene to scene, switching the spotlight there. Keep the one person as the sort of focal point of how are you reacting to such and such? How are you doing that? Because that keeps them involved in there, but it keeps that decision paralysis doesn't apply. It keeps all of their options oriented towards that character and towards what that character is doing and in reaction to that character. And that'll keep driving that character's motivation forward even though they're in the spotlight. Does that make sense? Yes.
How do you handle it when you're like pretty sure a character's fudging dice rolls?
Boom.
Oh.
Yeah. Cheese there, prosper. So there was a player I had in that Kingmaker game I was running, and for a while because we didn't have Discord wasn't out yet, and Skype had really crappy tools and those sorts of things. I let folks run on the honor system. So you roll at home, you tell me what you got, and one guy did have a statistically unlikely streak of 20s and confirmation of things. That player was going through a nasty divorce and custody battle, and was, had a lot of house issues at the time, and this was like his only respite. I was like, all right, if your life is so bad that you need to lie about rolling 2 d20s in a row, fine, I'll let you have it, buddy. I don't care. You're a friend. But that said, other players eventually kind of got upset about it, and they felt like they were playing the same thing, and he wasn't. And so I had a more private talk with them. Again, directly talking to your players as if they're people for some reason gets you really good results. And so I just said, hey man, you're rolling on 20s. You know, are those accurate? Or even just like reassuring him that, like I reassured him at the time that I wasn't gonna kill his character or anything. Like he wasn't gonna lose the entire kingdom on a bad dice roll. It was just gonna create further troubles for him. And you know, he said he wasn't fudging dice, but after I reassured him, I'm like, one bad roll is not going to kill your entire character, it's not going to kill his campaign. He loosened up a little bit, because I created that atmosphere of safety and that atmosphere of kind of permission and creativity. And the statistical anomaly resulted itself. So, you know, in that regard, it's not great to do it, but again, it's a why are you doing that, not stop doing that. Because they may be genuinely afraid of losing the character they put so much in, or they may be afraid of getting to a really dramatic scene and then just like falling on their face or something like that. That sucks. Again, you should only make people roll if failure is going to be actually really interesting. Yeah. Sure, someone else has another issue. Yes.
So this is, I'm soon starting my first campaign as well. Any tips on sprinkling in things for the future, you know, like not necessarily hooks, but clues or little things along the way for later in the campaign, like doing that naturally.
Yeah, I don't like to do like tricks and gimmicks. Some people suggest stuff like play some music while something's going on, and then when the bad guy reveals himself, play that music again. And it's like, you know, I don't think my players are clever enough to pick up on that language. This comes back to what I was saying earlier about have an idea of what's everything that's going on, have an idea of what the motivations of people are in the scene, and have an idea of how would the scene go if none of the players were here, or how would these things happen if you do believe in it. What's the sequence of events that can occur? Because once you have an idea of that, you see again how everything's moving on and getting on scene. And then if the players don't interact with a big section of that or something else going on, you can just kind of pepper in little bits from that sequence of events that's occurring. If two things are happening in parallel, especially, you can give little hints about that, what's going on in the parallel thing, so that when the, when a much bigger event happens much down the line in that track, you can point back to some of the earlier events in the sequence, and if you did a good enough job, players will realize that this thing is going on right under their noses. So, you know, don't belabor the point, but be mindful of Chekhov's gun. Are you familiar with that? Does everyone here know what Chekhov's gun is? Okay, cool. Nope, does anyone not know what it is? Okay, thank you. Chekhov was a very famous writer, and he said you never put a gun in the first act if it's not going to go off in the third act. There should be a conservation description. I talked a little bit earlier about some people's voice, about some people's tone being a little more purple, being a little more florid than other folks. And your description should tend towards to be verbose, especially when you're describing things, but be very careful about putting in unnecessary amounts of detail, and just be careful about the details that you do put in, and make sure that they're relevant. You know, what I would do for those other sequences, if you want to effectively foreshadow things, is just write down a single detail that you can just kind of edge in with all the others that you're sort of putting in there. If you do it often enough, the players will eventually pick up on it, and they'll realize that something is going on. And if they don't, once you eventually reveal it, they're like, oh, we should have picked up on that. And last but not least, this is just much more general GM advice. If you start to reveal your master plan, and one of your players blurts out a master plan that's way better than the one that you created, just be like, you figured it out. Absolutely. And just go with that. That happened to me again in that game recently. And I was like, I'm so glad you guys picked up on what I was putting down. I wasn't putting anything of that down. They saw a pattern where there wasn't one, but that pattern was a lot better than that pattern. So I was like, yes. Oh man. Improvisation is also about making you look good. You do have a question. Okay. Yeah, there's someone who was diagnosed with ADHD at 5. I have no organization skills either. And I'm a little offended if you would even ask me that. But no. Just keep in mind that it's not prose that you're writing, and it's not backstory necessarily. It's stuff for a game that needs to be used in a game. And keeping things more mechanically minded and keeping things in that very similar to is really going to help you out there. What I would do is I would break things into digestible chunks. I would get yourself a whiteboard. I would write the structure of the story as it goes through, the scenes that you want to kind of put into a certain game session, and what you want out of each scene, the tone, the mood, the things you convey. I'd actually break it down to the session level, because I think that's the easiest thing for you to do, like little 4-hour chunks. What do I want to convey to the players in these 4 hours? What do they need to know? What clues do they need to have? What plot events need to happen to keep moving it forward? And go from there. Make sure that you've got your little goals kind of checked off, and that you're hitting them as you go through the session itself. What you want out of it, and what you're trying to get them to get out of it. And then again at the end, ask if they got it. Ask if solicit feedback from them. The players will give you honest feedback, hopefully. If not, they've known they're pointing at themselves when it doesn't come out very well. So they get it. Yes.
How do you deal with a player that their play style can sometimes be antagonistic to the party or other players, or they can be selfish?
So, how do you deal with a player whose action can be sometimes antagonistic to other characters or other players? You have an honest conversation with them as an adult. You don't know being a dick. But you know, that aside, I do want to draw a difference between antagonizing other players, which is worse, and characters antagonizing other characters. As part of your tone and your session 0 thing, you should talk a little bit about PvP, inter-party conflict, and how much is going on in there. When I ran a game of Legend of the Five Rings, which has a big social component to it, one of the players outright asked the other players from session 0, he's like, my character's got some sneaky shinobi stuff going on. Do you mind if I do things under the other player characters' noses? Because all the other ones were honorable samurai, they didn't work with such things. And all the other players said yes, you can do that. Now, he did do some sneaky shit, and it did end up biting the party, you know, biting the party really bad later on. But everyone enjoyed it because it was all above board, right? Everyone knew what was going on. Everyone had bought into that already. It's about consent at the table, an affirmative, reaffirmed consent as it comes to as a law. I don't like, this is a side note, but I don't typically like in-character secrets lasting very long. I hate it when a player gives me a backstory, because I'm like, first off, I have to do all that. And you know, second off, you have this rich inner fantasy life that nobody else sees unless they read the 8-page document. If a player comes in and is like, I want a character to have this dark secret, but nobody else can know. It always runs into some difficulty because whenever you, as the GM, deliberately work in a detail or part of that backstory, because when a player gives you those sorts of things, they are signaling they want to see it in the game. So when you do actually work it in there, that player, that character reacts to that thing, but nobody else at the table does. Some player's sister was kidnapped by Brown or something, and she, at one point, you know, the character sees someone with white hair and it's all like weird there. None of the other players and none of the other characters know what's going on, and they can't kind of indulge in the pathos of the scene. So I tend to take a little bit of I tend to kind of split the difference on it. If a player comes to me and says, oh, the character has to start secret, I'm like, be prepared for the secret to be revealed in play in the next 3 seconds. It's gonna come up. It's gonna come up. And so that kind of sets that expectation for getting into the world. That went off topic, I know, but yeah. But, can you say what's your question? Yes.
Like,
Not good enough.
you just look like you have questions.
Yes.
So, even if someone who GM really wants and is good off with like game, how do you exactly like deal with situations if you put the party in like in a very dire situation that the party may not be able to escape, or like hypothetically speaking, what happens in the actual team?
A TP, the dreaded CPK. You know, keep in mind that you control the world, you control all of it, and you can just say something didn't happen. You don't want it to happen. There have been times when a player character forgot about the capabilities they had, too late for me to remind them, or you know, something happened and we realized that that shouldn't have happened because of the power that someone else had. If it's not too late in the scene, and it's not too late in what was going on, you can say, oh, that didn't happen. If your character, you know, gets mind controlled and you're like, wait, I have this thing on my sheet that says I'm immune to that. You're like, oh, okay. You can either, you know, you can retcon it and say, was your character faking it to get close to him and stab him, or something like that. It's something you can kind of roll with sometimes, or something you can just be like, okay, well then the last 2 turns did not happen.
Very
yeah, don't be afraid of your own power, of your own incredible divine power. You know, but if you're talking like in the longer term about like dealing with a TPK or something like that, we were talking a little bit earlier about death not being on the table. I said don't ever make someone roll unless failure is going to be in the story. That applies to death too. I don't like to kill player characters unless death would be in the story. And if there's a total party wipe or something, maybe they wake up without clothes and without weapons or something like that. They wake up somewhere else, or something else happens to them. There's another Legend of the Five Rings adventure, actually, that only comes into play if your characters die in like a CGK or something like that. And basically they all fall down in the underworld and God Death is like, cool, I've got a job for you. And like, oh, adventure, okay. So, you know, there's ways to keep going, and depending on the metaphysics of the world, maybe death isn't in there. Something that always interests me about D&D, especially coming from older editions of D&D, is how death is only really a thing, a permanent thing, up until like level 4 or 5. And after that, you start getting enough load to avoid to afford revivifies. You start getting clerics being able to cast that. And it gets to the point where actually getting gruesomely killed in combat is a minor inconvenience. You're like, oh man, I lost 5,000 gold. Like, I'm getting buying a diamond. Shit. You know, and as long as someone around there cares enough to do that, that is no big deal. So, depending on how the metaphysics are of your setting, what's going on, they may get a task from God to do something, and then they decide to make a break for it. And plenty of Greek heroes escape the end of that way. Yeah, I think we've got it fine. I hope all of you feel a little bit better about GMing. In case you've never GM'd before, we're now GMs.